Final hour overdrive continues. TSN 1050 on the TSN app, your home smart speaker, and up on TSN 2. Brian Hayes, Jamie Noodles McLennan, the O-Dog, is off to do some panel work tonight. Leafs Winnipeg on TSN 4. The Leafs have lost 3 in a row. Three games in a row. First time they've done that in a long time. I believe the first time they've done it with Sheldon Keefe behind the bench.
Well, I was reading today, if they lose 4 in a row, that would be the first time under Keefe's tenure. I think they've had 1 3-gamer. But
okay, again, maybe it was 3 games in regulation.
Yeah, maybe it was, but either
still,
way.
Still, 3 losses is 3 losses. They have not been in this position at any point all year. And Edmonton's won a few in a row. Winnipeg's right behind you in the standings with a couple of games in hand. They get you again tonight in regulation. And all of a sudden, you're in a race. You had a huge buffer a week ago, and that's how quickly it can turn.
But that's, I've been saying it all year. Like, I think it's going to be with the games in hand, with, you have a 3-game losing streak or a 3-game or 5-game winning streak. Like, Edmonton started 3-6, and Koskinen was, Mike Smith wasn't even in the picture. They were struggling, to find a backup. They lost on waivers.
Multiple times.
And then they won 11 of 13, and that got them off the mat back into it. And then, the Leafs have been quite consistent the whole year. Win, maybe 1 loss sprinkled in. Yeah, this is a little bit of adversity, even though, like we were talking about last hour, it doesn't look like adversity. You know what I mean? It looks like, hey, they hit a hot goalie, they hit, but wins are wins, and that's how you're measured right now, just based on where you are. And they've got to find a way to get a win tonight.
And as I said last hour, I think what truly defines how different the approach is, and I think the reaction to losses from myself, I can only speak for myself, but I think it permeates, the Leaf fan base, is how they go about winning as well. Where in years past, where you knew they were a flawed team,
right? But
they'd find a way to win some games, and you're like, that didn't add up. Like, they got outshot drastically, outpossessed. Freddie stood on his head. They were just, their power play was red hot. The other team, for whatever reason, just fell apart in the third. Like, there's always a reason where you kind of looked at a win and you cringed a little bit and said, that's not possibly sustainable. Like, at some point soon, it's going to come back and get them. And when they would eventually lose, you'd say, here we go. Like, I knew it. I saw it coming. This is where we thought this was going. Now it's very different. You look at the 3 preceding wins prior to this 3-game losing streak. It was in Edmonton where they were thoroughly impressive wins. Right. Deserved to win. It wasn't as if Michael Hutchinson stood on his head, who played a game there. Jack Campbell stood on his head, who played a game there. It was simply the Leafs outperformed their opposition pretty much in every facet. Right. And that, I think, allows myself to look at 3 losses and say, they're still playing pretty well, and they were winning the right way. They're losing the right way, quote unquote, and I believe they'll get back on the horse. Yeah, and I think it'll start tonight.
Yeah, you've got to find a way to – but, what you don't want to creep into your game is doubt. Hey, maybe we should, hey, we're losing. Like, let's open things up. Let's try this. Let's try that. Like, you have to stay the course. And I would argue that's what Sheldon Keefe would probably be hammering home is, hey, I like the way we're playing, or we're generating enough. Don't try to open it up just based on it. And I said this the other day, and I don't know where you stand on this. Like, I did see them have a little bit of problems with a heavy forecheck, which I hadn't seen, to be honest, consistently all year. Like, I thought their D have been mobile, moved out of trouble. The forwards have supported, and they were fine. But there was a couple pockets, I don't know if you remember, but in last game where it was like, hey, you know what? That was kind of last year, the last couple years of the Leafs were like, you're like, But I don't think Justin Hall had a great night.
So he's had a tough week and a half, I guess. Right. Like in Edmonton, I think he was fine, but the Vancouver games caught up to him a little bit, caught up to him a couple nights ago to the point where Bogosian got a couple of shifts with Muzzin. And I think that's to be expected. Like, Justin Hall's barely made it into the league. I think we take it for granted, the fact that this guy is in his late 20s, was in the minors for as long as he was, sat on the bench a couple of years ago for a full year, and really performed well the first 20 games.
Right.
Like, really, really played well. And, solidified himself as a guy you're comfortable with on that second pairing. But there's still going to be some hiccups, and
Yep.
there have been, and it's on him to embrace that and learn from it and get back going, right?
Agreed.
Like it's all on him because this team isn't going to wait for anybody,
No.
especially Justin Hull. If he proves he's hit a wall here and it's not working, in goes Bogosian, up goes Dermott, or even bigger adjustments if need be.
Agreed. I agree.
It was a year ago today. You were in L.A. You were
Yep.
calling an Ottawa Kings game, which, as you have pointed out, was the last game played in North America.
Yeah, Pro Sports, I believe, because we got the announcement just as we were kind of going up. Like it was a 10:30 Eastern start, 7:30 local time in L.A., and it was an eerie feeling already. And our producer goes, hey, this, Gobert, like, see what's going on here.
Right.
And this could be the last NHL game.
Well, you were in L.A. calling a game. I was in Florida watching the pregame of Oklahoma City, Utah, like not thinking anything of it. I'm like, yeah, they're stalling here. Something weird's going on.
Yeah.
But I guess we'll find out. And then sure enough, boom, Rudy Gobert tested positive. The game gets canceled. There are fans pouring out, and they weren't happy. And we got a guy who was in the building from ESPN, covers the NBA. He's been on the show before. It's great to have him back here. It's Royce Young. Royce, I'm sure you're doing the rounds today. I know you are. So I'm guessing we're going to ask you this for the 15th or 20th time today. But can you recall the feeling and the mood in the building prior to the official announcement that the game was being canceled?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the general feeling, at least from the crowd perspective, was confusion and not understanding what was delaying the game. They're playing the standard hype up song right before tip off that they play at Thunder games, and the teams are all out there, literally out there, waiting for the referee to throw the ball up. And then, and a lot of people probably didn't see the Thunder's doctor, Donnie Strack, come running off the bench. A lot of people just saw that there was some holdup that they weren't tipping the ball off. And so it was kind of extending on and on and on. So in the arena, I think there was a lot of confusion. I actually heard people behind me, and they were tapping me, trying to ask, what's the deal? What's going on here? And for me, kind of some of the things reporting and the things I was hearing leading up to it, I mean, it was very obvious to me what was happening. I didn't necessarily know specifically it was Rudy Gobert, but I knew that there was some sort of virus-related issue that was delaying this game. I thought it was just the league was trying to weigh whether or not there was a possible contact tracing or like an inconclusive test situation or something of that degree. But it was very, very obvious to me. I mean, it's not a typical sight when you see a team doctor run out and be the one to stop the game. So I was probably only one of a handful of people that actually knew who Donnie Strack was, having covered the team. And so as soon as I saw him come out, that's not something Donnie Strack would normally do.
Do you think it's fair? We were talking about this before you came on last hour, that Rudy Gobert is kind of the face of, I wouldn't say face of COVID, but for pro sports, like it was him, and then everything shut down. Like, do you think it's fair, even though it's not, that he's kind of been the symbolic guy for it?
Absolutely. And, I think Gobert himself would acknowledge that. And, and in a lot of ways, he was vilified for kind of his behavior leading up to it, and he's admitted to that and felt like he displayed some immaturity. He's acknowledged that, taken responsibility for it. But in some ways, he raised everybody's level of awareness. I mean, it's in kind of a twisted way, it was a blessing in disguise, I think. I've had this conversation with some people before, but when you talk about other major events, whether that's like a national weather event with a hurricane hitting shore, or, whether it's like a terrorist attack or something horrible happening, there's one of these mega media events where everybody's tuned in and locked in on it. So there's some moment that it happened. There's something specific to like focus in on and kind of build your narrative out of and follow along with. With a global pandemic, it's like this slow trickle, right? Like the virus started here, it spread a little here, went to Italy. They were locking down in Italy, but it was just kind of arriving in North America, and there wasn't like this moment of like, oh, it's here. And I really think the Jazz Thunder game with Gobert was kind of that moment. It was the hurricane hitting shore, right? Like it was the moment where everything became real to everyone.
I totally agree with you, and I think that triggered a domino effect that we have never really seen before that lasted as long as it did. There have been major events in time that have shut down sports, shut down industry before, with the expectation in the next couple of days we'll pick it back up. where Rudy Gobert, comes out, he tests positive, he's out. That game gets shut down again. I was sitting there in Florida watching it live. I was watching the pregame. They're scrambling. Like they're just trying to kill time. They don't know what they're supposed to do. Everyone's been in that spot where you're on the mic and your producer's telling you got to kill, man. I don't know what else to tell you here. And sure enough, they shut it down. The people start filtering out. And my initial thought was, okay, well, the rest of the NBA is going down because there was another game later that night that was supposed to be played in the NBA that they shut down. Hockey games continued, but that was it. The PGA Tour was down at Sawgrass. They had played their first round. They shut down. And it just was like Rudy Gobert, fairly or unfairly, was the first domino that affected the whole sports world.
Yeah, and, it's funny. I was in the building and experienced this event firsthand. But, specifically with the NBA, they announced it as they are postponing the NBA season, right? So, this was a lot of conversations I had with league executives, agents throughout the league over that night. There wasn't necessarily an immediate belief throughout the league that it was over with, right? There was kind of like, okay, they'll push pause, get things sorted out, and then things will rev back up in a couple weeks. That's kind of how some people felt about it. But for me, it wasn't until the following day. I was actually standing out in front of the arena about to do a live shot for SportsCenter, and they quickly told me, hey, we have to bump you back. And it was because they had canceled the NCAA tournament. And for me, that was like the moment I was like, oh, like this is like it's getting all sports. Like sports are going down right now.
Right.
Because, again, the NBA season was just postponed. It wasn't canceled yet. And for them to cancel something so significant as the NCAA tournament, that was kind of my like official, even though I was in the building and experienced all that, that was my official like, wow, well, this is really happening.
It was a year ago tonight. Rudy Gobert testing positive for the Utah Jazz. Utah was at Oklahoma City. That game got shut down, and as a result, the whole sports world, and the world for that matter, shut down. And we chatted with Royce Young of ESPN. He was in the building covering the game that night. Go ahead, Noodles.
When they announced the cancellation of the game, my understanding, were you there like a significant amount of time, like everyone stuck in the building that night?
Yeah, well, I was. I mean, I wasn't necessarily stuck per se. They got fans to leave, probably within 30 minutes after that, and they asked them to kind of politely file out. And Oklahomans are generally mild-mannered, and they all followed directions pretty well, and they made their way out. But I was in it for the long haul, and I kind of set up base with my producer and camera crew near as we could be to the Jazz locker room. We did a whole bunch of live shots, and my bosses at ESPN got in touch with us, and they said, hey, we understand the significance of this, but there's also some understandable fear, and if you don't feel comfortable being here, it's okay. You can leave. And my producer and I, his name is Patrick Abrahams, we looked at each other, we're like, we're not going anywhere. This is a moment of history right here. We're in this thing. So, I didn't leave that arena until the Jazz left, which they left at about 1:30. I actually ended up staying about an hour after them because I had a few more things I had to get in the tank. But I was not going anywhere.
Yeah, I remember seeing you that night. It was a wild scene, and you look at it, we're a year past that now, and we're still dealing with a lot of COVID and the aftermath of that evening and those early weeks of COVID and where we're at currently. But the NBA's back and they're playing. And Rudy Gobert was obviously at the forefront of all this. His teammate Donovan Mitchell also tested positive, and then immediately there was all of this rumor and conjecture that the two of them were just not on the same page, and Mitchell blamed Rudy Gobert, and this idea that maybe the two of them could not coexist. You fast forward a year later, they do coexist. They're both All-Stars, and Utah is the first-place team overall. It's a pretty incredible story when you look at it like that, Bruce.
Yeah, one of the few situations in our entire world where if you ask the question, are you better off today than you were a year ago? The Utah Jazz can say they were.
Yeah.
a lot of people not so much. But I think it does speak to Gobert's acknowledgement of the responsibility and the culpability that he had in that situation. Because you're exactly right. There was some blame involved from Donovan Mitchell. Rudy Gobert. It's with how much we've learned about the virus and everything else that's kind of come in between. It's very possible that Donovan Mitchell's the one that gave it to Rudy Gobert. We don't actually know who gave it to who, but the way the narrative was built out is that there was some tension and some animosity between the two of them, and it was just kind of it came to a head based on some of the things that they were experiencing on the basketball court too. But again, to Gobert's credit, he took responsibility for basically all of it and wanted to work it out because he understood, look, I got this superstar teammate here, and if we're gonna achieve the goal we want, which is a similar goal of being the best team that we can be and possibly winning a title, we've got to get on the same page. And so that's what they did. And the Jazz are an excellent basketball organization. They have an excellent coach in Quinn Snyder, and with what they've got in the in place with Gobert and Mitchell, they've filled out a roster around them. Mike Conley's played great. They've got a really, really good team, and they're sitting pretty now a year later.
With Royce Young of ESPN. So I'm sure as a journalist, you're kind of thinking of what you're going to write about, talk about, discuss in the future. And I can imagine the next time that building is allowed to be full, and I'm not sure when that's going to be, but hopefully in the next calendar year, and Rudy Gobert and the Jazz roll through, you'll probably be doing another one of these recaps. What do you expect that atmosphere to be like, Royce, when that building can fill back up again? And I guess when Utah and Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell roll through again, and it's almost as if that game and that evening is finally completed, whether it's a year and a half, 2 years down the road.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, it's funny that the Thunder opened up the bubble in Orlando with the Jazz. And, that felt very fitting, right? And we kind of did this whole thing of, okay, they finally played the game. Donnie Strack didn't run out and interrupt at this time. And then, guess what? They open up their home season this year against the Jazz. That's who the Thunder opened their home schedule with. And, again, it was kind of this, okay, the Jazz are in the building. Rudy Gobert is finally playing a game in Oklahoma City. I remember looking out on the court and seeing Gobert warming up, and it was kind of surreal to be like, there he is. He's here. But you're 100% right. When it finally comes completely full circle and the Jazz play the Thunder, and, there will be a lot of different faces on the team. No Chris Paul, no, a lot of other players that have moved along. But it will feel kind of like, the final chapter has been closed on that saga, so to speak. So I think the building will be absolutely electric. I think there are some people that still, for some reason, I think kind of hold a little bit of a grudge with Gobert, but I think the reception will actually be really positive for him. I think a lot of people will rally and kind of support what kind of the journey that he's gone through, and the fact that that game and having fans in the building will kind of signify checking the final box. And in some ways, I think while the game March 11th a year ago was the beginning of all this, maybe that game where the Thunder and Jazz play in a full building will almost signify the end of all of it, too.
Right.
Yeah,
that
would be great. How has your coverage of the team been affected? I mean, everyone's been affected. We're doing this show from home, and for you to be on Zoom calls and not being face to face with players, how has all of this affected your coverage of the team?
Well, it's certainly tested the relationships that you've built up over years, and it's made the job very difficult. My reporting style is very much to be eyes and ears. I like to rely a lot on seeing and being there and trying to go to the places and show fans the places that they're not able to go. So not being in locker rooms and not being behind the scenes and talking with people pregame and postgame, not walking out with a player and getting those couple extra questions in to kind of get an explanation about what you were seeing there or extra question or two as a follow-up for a feature you're working on. I mean, all that, missing out on all that type of stuff is really tough. And I am quite tired of Zoom call availability. It is getting very, very old, and I don't enjoy it. But I do have the privilege to get to go to games in Oklahoma City. They play the Mavericks tonight. I'm going to that game. There's no fans in the building, but they do allow limited media. So, I mean, at least I get to do that, and that's a start. And hopefully down the line we can get back to doing some of the traditional reporting and telling some of those same old stories that I used to tell. As much as I try to do them now, it's definitely a challenge.
Yep, I think you speak for everyone in the industry for sure, and we're looking forward to those normal days that are hopefully on the horizon and coming quick, sooner rather than later. Great stuff on this, Royce. Really appreciate you taking time for us and taking us through a year ago and everything that's transpired since. We'll do it again down the road. Thank you for this.
Yeah, you bet. My pleasure, guys.
There's Royce Young from ESPN.com from Oklahoma City, and I just thought of just him mentioning Oklahoma.
Yeah.
One of the big stories during the COVID era of people being stuck at home was finding new content, finding new shows.
Right.
And we haven't mentioned the name Joe Exotic on this show in probably 9 months, right?
You're
but the
right.
first 2 or 3 months, Tiger King was everywhere. It was the topic of discussion for everybody quarantining or just being stuck in their homes and watching different shows. And that zoo, that tiger zoo or whatever, is in Oklahoma somewhere.
Oh, really? I didn't. I
Yeah,
mean, I
it's
watched
in
that
Oklahoma.
show, and we would laugh about it. Like I remember when Trump got ousted, like the last day there was some pardoning, and there was like, is he going to pardon Joe Exotic? That's
Right.
the last time I remember that name coming
Well,
to the
apparently Joe
forefront.
Exotic had rented a stretch limousine to wait for him outside of the jail because he's serving like 20 years or whatever for attempted murder, Carol Baskin, killing
Yeah, he's
tigers,
an
all
idiot.
that.
You know,
He's
like,
a complete buffoon. But
Yeah.
he legitimately thought there was a chance Trump was going to pardon
Yeah.
him and offer up some clemency, and it didn't happen. So the limousine showed up, sat out there for a while, and left, and Joe Exotic is still behind bars.
Still in the clink. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, where he belongs. But I mean, even following that up, like Carol Baskin, like there are people that harass her now, kind of how we joke on the show that,
Well, the
her
husband.
first, the husband, he's missing.
A little bit too convenient, that story,
Yeah,
that
it's
alibi.
But it's what was that? Making of a Murderer. Remember how that was such a cult following?
Absolutely. That
Joe
was
Exotic
one of the craziest documentaries. And the amazing thing about that is the guy is in jail again.
I know.
Like he gets out, falsely accused,
Yeah.
and now he's back in jail and
Right.
he's never getting out.
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
But that show, like watching it, it was like watching a train wreck. But you couldn't take your eyes off of
Constantly.
it because
Every
you're
10
like,
seconds
there's-
something else happened where you're like, this is the goofiest thing I've ever seen.
The whole fascinating thing for me about that was just watching or listening to them talk on the phone. There would be like you have a conversation with people. There's rarely like stretches of 3 or 4 or 5 seconds of nothing.
You're talking the making of a murderer.
Yeah, making of a murderer.
He'd be calling his mom from jail or whatever, and you're
Yeah.
right. There'd be 30 seconds go by 4 words.
You're like, what is going on? Like it was just fascinating watching it, and that was actually one that engrossed me. Like I was.
What was his name again? I gotta find
Brendan
Steve Avery.
Steve Avery and Brendan Dassey, I believe.
Dassey was his nephew.
Dassey was the nephew that thought he would
play
he would,
video games.
Yeah, play video games. Remember, they brought him into the office and he basically said, "Yeah, I was there, and this lady got killed and all that. Can I go back to class?" Like he had no idea.
No, there was some issues there with Dassey, and he was close to getting out because, like, there's been a big push to get him out that he clearly, wasn't in the right frame of mind or was coerced or the cops were, a little bit offside with their questioning and misleading and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But, you're right, man.
Even the prosecutor had to, like, he's not a prosecutor anymore because he got himself in some trouble with I think some harassment or some texts and stuff.
Is that
like
right?
It's the fallout from that show. I think there should be another show about it, and there might be.
I think there is. I think there is a following up of Making a Murderer.
Yeah,
where he's
it's
trying
crazy.
to get back out again for the murder,
being
and the
framed or
conviction.
whatever. Yeah. It's
crazy. It is wild. They're both, I think, on Netflix. But Joe Exotic and Tiger King, that was a huge trend.
Yeah.
I'd say the first month or two of COVID, and then it just gets washed out, and like society moves on to something else.
Well,
But-
I mean, we all are still streaming stuff online, and Crave and all of you name all the companies. We're all watching them.
Oh, they're making money, right? There are some businesses that have really had a lucrative calendar year.
Absolutely.
And streaming services would be one of them because everyone's at home.
Yeah.
Everyone's at home for the most part. And I think it's going to continue for a while anyway. So thanks again to Royce Young. Leafs back in action tonight. The Raptors in action. We'll get to our best bets brought to you by Proline. Overdrive continues, TSN 1050 and on TSN 2. All right, we'll get to our best bets brought to you by Proline a little bit later in the hour. The Leafs back in action tonight. Daryl Sutter making his debut back in Calgary. And Montreal's coming off a win last night, back-to-back. Calgary should be inspired. I think it's going to set up for a win tonight, personally, for Calgary.
I think it'll look good for Calgary. The weird part about it for me, and I've been talking to people out there, and even former players have reached out to me just kind of, almost anxious to see how it's going to go. And the whole narrative is not about Daryl and the team. It's like, how's Daryl going to handle wearing a mask on the bench?
That's right.
Like, how's he going
to,
daily COVID tests and stuff? Like, this is a guy who, has been not removed from the game, because he's been an advisor in Anaheim and been very close with that team and helping out Dallas Aikens there. But for the most part, my understanding is with COVID, he's been back home. So you've been on the farm, you've been doing farming stuff. Like, the little things, stuff like that, the transition, it'll be new for him. Like, you're not going to be able to have that one-on-one with a player without having COVID protocols thrown in your face left and right. Like, I watched a live stream of him go out on the ice, his first practice with the team. He's out there, he's on the bench, he's taping a stick. He's talking to the trainer. Trainer's got a mask on, he's got a mask on. Now he starts skating around. He's talking to players. You could see players trying to, what are you saying? Like, because you're talking through a mask. Like, I can't imagine some of these coaches.
He's tough to pick up on anyway.
Right.
Like Daryl at the best of times.
Right.
He's kind of difficult to understand, and he mumbles a little bit. And
right. He's got a different
but
tone
there's no
to his
crowd
voice.
in there, too. Like, what can compensate with that, or I guess equal out the playing field, is there's no crowd, so you don't have to yell necessarily as much.
Yeah.
I think that could help a little bit. But you're right. You've always said this. He's a close talker. He's a guy that gets right in there. And I don't believe you're allowed to do that. Like, I don't know what the rules are when you're on the bench. I don't see why when you're on the bench it can't just be, we're here, we're playing, we've made the commitment, we've done our testing, everything's cleared, go for it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm fine. I understand coaches wearing a mask. But if you want to get right in close to a guy to send a message to him, why can't you do that? I guess it's more optics probably than anything else.
But like, I have buddies who are literally like, you throw the bubble in there where they went through the bubble, and then regular season they're like, I've had 200 COVID tests. Like, I get it every day. Like, their routine is, I gotta be there, or the COVID test is at 8:30 every morning. I gotta be there for 8:30, and so it's almost like. You're right. They're tested so much and they stay. It's and I understand they're trying to be safe, but it's almost like they've gone, which is good, especially in the Canadian division, because knock on wood, we haven't had any shutdowns and that type of stuff. But they've gone over and above what has been recommended to them, and that is like masks everywhere, distancing. Like, the players can't even go to each other's room. On a 10-day road trip.
We had Shifley on yesterday. Mark said you're allowed to see your family if you play in a division where they happen to be. I mean, clearly,
right.
if you Americans, their family members aren't going to be up here.
Right.
If you're a Canadian playing in the States and your parents up here, you're not going to see them. But you're allowed to see them outside, socially distanced, and go for a walk. Like,
right.
It's really strict rules, and it had to be, and it has to be. And there is light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe it's just me, I am very fascinated by the vaccine athlete conversation and when it's going to happen, how many players respond to it, how many players are willing to take it, how many aren't,
I think
and whether or not they'll go public with that.
Yeah.
And it also is a border issue, clearly. Down in the States, they're in a different spot than we are right now. So I think the plan would have to be for every other sports league that by Labor Day, the whole workforce is vaccinated.
Right.
Like every player, every coach, every trainer. And I don't know what the plan is up here. And I don't know what is a reasonable expectation.
I think a reasonable explanation or expectation would be for the start of next hockey season, October.
Right.
And I mean, the start of next hockey season, I think, is going to get pushed back because
so?
Maybe by 2 weeks. I'm not saying like by 2 months, but think of like the Stanley Cup. If it goes 7 games, I believe the last date isn't it early
July 20th? No,
right.
I think it's a little bit later than that. It's like they're out before the Olympics, but the Olympics begins July 25th or something like that.
Right. So let's say it's July 20th. Like that's a month of cutting into your summer because usually the Stanley Cup is handed out June 10th, June 13th. So you're going to be 5 weeks into a traditional off season. I think the NHL has to offset that. You have to make sure that the guys have the right amount of rest and off season. So I think it'll be October 15th, October 20th. I don't think it'll be, December 1st. But
no,
I
not
think
if you're fitting in 82 and you want to be a normal schedule.
You're right. But I believe that it's not going to start, October 3rd like
That's
we're used
fine.
to it.
Yeah.
But my point being is I would argue by that, whatever it is, drop of the puck, I'm just using the hockey season for reference, everyone is going to be vaccinated that wants to be. And they're going to have access to it, and the world's going to look different because, Canada is starting to get going here. North America, they're flying. I have friends who are 40 years old that have had it. And they're, they've had their first dose. They're waiting on their second dose, which is 3 weeks later. I know it's changed as far as the rules. They're saying up to 4 months you can have it now. But
I don't know if that's happening down in the States.
Right, but I don't think it's happening down in the States because I think they've stretched it. Right, they've got an abundance of supply in the States. Point being is we're going to be able to take our cue from the U.S. because they're going to be a couple months ahead of us. Minimum. They'll be several months ahead of us, but I think these leagues will get on the same page by the time the next season
I think so too. I definitely know that's happening in the States. Like, they're not waiting for Canada, clearly, nor should they. When the football season starts, college and the NFL, we're talking packed stadiums. And I think when the NBA and NHL begins next October, early November, it may not be packed, but I think it'll be close. And I think in certain jurisdictions it will be. Like, look at the Texas Rangers. We haven't spent a lot of time on that over the past couple of days, but that story broke yesterday, I believe. Full capacity for 2 exhibition games, which makes no sense whatsoever, and then full capacity for opening day, and then they're going to scale it back. So they're going to have like a 3-day party and then scale it back a little bit, but it won't be substantial. And I think once they've laid out the framework of this is how it's going to work, they'll just keep amping up and amping up. And they understand after opening day anyway, you're not getting a packed house to begin with. Right. So just naturally you're going to have less people in the stands. And sure enough, the Blue Jays are at Texas for their home opener. So the team that has been affected the most by COVID, more so than maybe any other team in North America, the Raptors included, will be in a stadium with 40,000 people, and then back to Dunedin, then up to Buffalo, and then maybe they come to Toronto, although who knows this upcoming summer if that's going to happen or not. I'm still holding out hope. Like, I'm trying to be optimistic that they'll find a way to come up, but I have no idea.
Well, but you're starting to see it trickle out. I mean, I'm keeping in touch with people in Alberta that are saying, the age is coming down now to 50 to get to book online and stuff like that. So it's coming, and you got to be patient. But ultimately, we're going to be having this conversation a month from now, and it's going to look different. And then another month, and things are going to start to break. And I know people judge, but some of this is trial and error. Texas's their format has been different. Florida's format's been different than New York State's format. Some of them are right, some of them are wrong. Some of it is a moral argument or a political argument that I'm not going to head there. It's more about, what works for that particular state may not work for another one based on weather, age of people that go. I'm not super. I'm not going to get political about it, but it's more about.
Well, yeah, there are different approaches to it, and that applies around the world, clearly. I mean, we have taken a very conservative one up here in this country, and conservative in our own city. I think we lose sight of that because it depends on what side of the aisle you're on in terms of numbers, in terms of COVID, in terms of how much it has just overtaken your life.
Correct.
In terms of tracking all of the data and all of the details. But, we're slowly opening up a little bit, but not much. And when you compare to other cities around the world, we're still very shut down.
Agreed. Very shut down.
Relatively speaking, we've done an okay job. The virus, it did what it did. It was going to do what it was going to do. A year ago today, it was announced. We've got a pandemic on our hands. I had no idea what that meant. I'm not ashamed of saying that. I didn't know what it meant.
Right.
When they said, 2 weeks, we're going to keep the kids at home and we'll see what happens. I'm like, all right, 2 weeks. And I don't think I was alone. I think everyone was kind of like, all right, I guess, a couple of weeks. Like, how can you prepare to go from 0 to 60 and then stay at 60 for a year? Like, who could ever have prepared for that? And who could ever know that we'd still be in a spot where we're doing shows from home? The Leafs are playing Winnipeg tonight in an empty building. The Raptors are in Tampa tonight playing a home game. And the Jays are in Dunedin and we don't know when they're coming home.
Yeah, you're right. Like
if
we stepped out of our conversation and said, a year ago, fast forward, we're going to be talking about this a year from now. Empty buildings, relocations, all of this stuff. Like, I think we would say, you're crazy.
You're crazy. Of course you'd say that.
But
you're crazy.
But you know what? Let's look at it in a positive light. A year from now, let's see what the snapshot looks like. And, you and I will be in studio yelling and screaming with O-Dog, and we're going to be talking about the Leafs playing Winnipeg, and, hey, I'm going down. We're going to alumni box. Like, that's what I'm hoping for.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Oh, we're getting back there, man. I've always been a believer in that. Like,
right.
The pandemics happened, the Spanish flu happened, and then what was it right after it? The Roaring 20s. Right. So let's get roaring, man. We just got to get through this and be safe and take care of yourself. And, it's probably a perfect day to acknowledge everyone that has put their lives on the line and everyone that has been really at the forefront of all this and the frontline workers. And we can't thank you enough, and we appreciate everything. And we thank and appreciate everyone who's been along for the ride with us. Not that we're going anywhere. We'll still be back tomorrow, but sports shut down. We're doing shows from home, and we've been lucky enough to have an audience that has been riding shotgun with us here for a long time.
Yeah, and going through the process with us.
We don't lose sight of that. Yeah, we know how lucky we are.
Agreed. And so I just wanted to switch over to the Leaf game. Like I'm just looking at the lines. It looks like Agostino's going to play the left side with Spezza and Vesey. So that's your fourth line.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm interested to see.
Vesey's all of a sudden come alive a little bit.
I honestly, I'll be honest, and I think I was honest about him and a little hard on him before that Edmonton road trip. I'm like, I thought this guy was on the cusp. Like he was working his way out of the lineup, and then he has a good road trip and kind of gets some confidence going. And he's hanging around. He's hanging around. I think he's got 5 goals on the season, and he looks like some nights he can be a real effective player. Other nights I don't notice him. I'll be honest.
No, I think the first 15 to 20 games he was very underwhelming. I didn't think he really brought a lot to the table, but he's on the cheap. And he's got a little bit of size. He is capable of playing, and I think he's found a bit of a rhythm recently, and all of a sudden he's chipping in a little bit.
Right.
That bottom 6 with that Engvall, Hyman, Mikheyev line, and now Spezza and Vesey have connected. They're getting some pretty decent production.
Right.
So, I guess I'm curious about Agostino because I'm familiar with his name, and he's been with the organization for a couple of years. I'm not holding my breath that this is going to be some massive revelation where he steps in and just is a rock star and stays on that line for the rest of the year. But they're kicking tires. They've gone through the filter a little bit. Barabanov is not really fit. Boyd's been okay. I think he's been a pretty good find, but you're willing to upgrade there if you can. Vesey's just been okay. Now you try someone else.
You know what the biggest shock? You know what the biggest shock for me has been is Lettinen. Like here's a guy that we were talking him up. Like
big time, based on what he did in the KHL and the fact that they lured him here.
This guy was a point producer on the power play in the KHL. Handled the puck very well. Looked like and wasn't a 21-year-old rookie. I believe he's 27.
Yep.
Like so, you're coming over to step right in and to be kind of an impact player. I thought he was going to get a look higher up in the lineup. I thought he was going to they were going to force feed him into the lineup maybe the first 15 games just to get him acclimated to the league, and it just hasn't. I mean, maybe it's been more of a push for Travis Dermott to be like, hey, I don't want to be the guy on the outside.
Yeah, and I think he's responded pretty well.
Yeah, you're right.
I think it seems like he's just kind of out of the rotation now. Lettinen, I believe he's been loaned to the Marlies, which means he still can come up whenever, but basically you got to go down there and play, and we'll see you later. And Barabanov, the same thing. And I was of the belief that they would be given the opportunity. I guess they have been. I'm sure the Leafs would argue we've played you. We've given you the opportunity. You didn't find a way to hold on to your spot, and the Leafs aren't going to wait for anybody. This isn't house league. Everyone doesn't get a shift, but based on the history of guys coming out of the KHL who have suitors kicking their tires, generally speaking, history would have indicated, and I think it did here, the Leafs got them because they promised them an opportunity to play.
Right.
And, again, I think the Leafs would say we gave both of them a chance. And they didn't pull their weight or they didn't see enough. And the Leafs are in a cup now window. So we're leaving you behind if you can't keep up.
It's just,
and I'm fine with that.
I'm fine with it. Like, I understand probably the reasoning behind the scenes, but it's, Ozhiganov, Barabanov, like Lettinen, like I thought you would think that one of them would have hit.
I think
like,
they'd say Mikheyev has
well,
hit.
Mikheyev for sure. He's a nice player.
Mikheyev has hit.
Right, but I mean, you hope that's like I thought one of them would be. I guess maybe I was wrong, but I thought Lettinen was going to be playing an everyday role.
I thought he
just
would
hasn't
too.
found.
I thought he would
hasn't
too.
found
But it says something about the KHL, which is a massive drop off from the NHL. It's a big drop off, and if you light it up over there,
you're right.
It's like lighting it up in the American Hockey League. It doesn't mean it's going to translate. And I think ever since they signed him, they went out there and also signed Brody, who was going to play in front of them, Bogosian, who was going to play in front, and Justin Hall has continued to grow.
Right.
So if you remember, they signed Lettinen before the lockdown and before COVID, I believe, or around that time. But since then, again, they've added to their group, and he's been left behind. So maybe if they were in a different spot, if Brody wasn't here, if they moved on from Dermott, maybe he'd be playing. But they're not in a position to do that. And will it affect guys they go after in the future? It might. It might. But they've given an opportunity to a lot of guys. Like Zaitsev worked that first year. He got a massive deal. Now it is what it is. He's in Ottawa. Mikheyev has worked. There's been a few guys that didn't.
Right.
So be it. You're trying to mine talent. You're trying to find talent. You get it on the cheap. And I'm all good with the wink, wink. We'll give you a shot. We'll give you 5 games, 10 games. You can't guarantee a full season.
No.
And if the guy doesn't play up to
what
he's supposed to play at, then you're out.
You got to earn it. That's the thing.
Yep.
And, you create internal competition, and right now he's on the outside looking in.
Absolutely. We'll get to our best bets brought to you by Proline. Tee up the Leafs and Raptors again. Overdrive continues. TSN 1050 and on the TSN app. All right, the Raptors back in action tonight. You can hear that on TSN Radio, and Atlanta's a game back. The Raptors are just hanging on here, and they've got 3 games in the next 4 nights, including against Atlanta tonight. Atlanta is currently 11th in the East. They're a game back of the Raptors. Then they are at Charlotte. Charlotte is 7th in the East. The Raptors are a half game behind them. Then they're at Chicago, and Chicago is currently tied with the Raptors. So, the next
Big
3
games,
massive games, Atlanta and Charlotte and Chicago, and Siakam's still out, Anunoby's still out, Van Vliet's still out. Vegas has Atlanta as a favorite tonight, and I can't really blame them. Those you take 3 of your 4 best players out of the lineup. It's going to be Lowry's got to go big tonight. Boucher's got to keep playing well tonight. Baines, Norman Powell's got to be big. Right. And Terrence Davis is a game-time decision. If he plays, he's going to get minutes, and he's got to score. He's got to give him something off the bench. Tonight, they need it.
It's going to be a grind for them, but
big time.
These next 3 or 4 games might sway what direction they head, too.
One way or the other. Yep, yeah, exactly. You obviously cannot afford to lose all 3. If you do that, you're really staring up at it. But they've dug themselves out of a hole before. I think you can only do that once, though. You started 2-8. You can't have another 2-8 stretch. You just can't. You're not going to get out of it. You're not good enough. You're not deep enough.
Not enough games left.
Not enough games left. And the East has gotten better. There's teams like the Knicks who are playing well. Charlotte's been good. Atlanta, Chicago. These are younger teams who are on the up and up, and they're hungry. Yeah. They're very hungry. So you cannot allow for a dip. Time now for our best bets, brought to you by Proline. I'm on the Islanders, who just keep rolling in that division. Yeah. They're sitting atop that division. They have been red hot. They had a very mediocre start. Who's kind of fight now is that Boston team. Like they're not a lock anymore. They looked like it a couple of weeks ago, but
they're sniveling around. Like I think they got hot for a while, and then all of a sudden they ran into some injuries, and everyone else is catching up to you. That's why I think you're playing against each other every night.
Every night.
And the points are there. And if you don't stay consistent, win 2 out of every 3 or, 3 out of 5, like all of a sudden you go on a cold streak and teams are passing you. It's crazy. It really is.
It really is. Yep.
That's why it's scoreboard watching, and it's going to be standings watching the rest of the season.
Every single night. Yeah. And listen, Boston's got a rich history of getting back on the horse and moving, and it's tough to bet against that, but it's one of those 5 teams, really quality teams, Pitt, Washington, Philly, the Islanders, Boston. One of them is going to miss.
Yeah.
So I'm on the Islanders tonight. I'm on Tampa, Detroit, and I will take Calgary tonight. Montreal on a back-to-back. Daryl Sutter behind the bench. Throw down 20. You can score 59. You can find my picks on Twitter at TSN 1050 Radio. ProLine is the sports betting game that lets you turn small wagers into big excitement. Before you wager, get the latest odds, info, and matchup stats on your phone. ProLine, put your knowledge on the line. So the Leafs are a favorite tonight. We'll find out on TSN 4. The Raptors are a 3-point dog at home against Atlanta. You can hear that coming up next on TSN Radio. You got two. Right?
Yep.
You're calling a game tomorrow night. Johnny will be back, and O will be back. We are out of here. Enjoy your evenings. Enjoy your games. We're back tomorrow at
4 p.m.
We'll chat
then.